For page 33, we're going to continue talking about dividing polynomials using long division. This is going to be very similar to long division of whole numbers. The process works the exact same way. The only difference is we've got some letters in there now. So it's going to be a little bit tricky, but once you get the hang of it, you'll notice that the process is the same thing over and over again. Just remember from your elementary days that the number on the outside of the division bar is called your divisor. The number inside is called the dividend, and the number that you get as the answer is called your quotient. So when you divide two polynomials, you can check your answer by using the following. If you remember, if you want to check if your answer is correct, you take your quotient, you multiply it by your divisor. If there is a remainder, you add on the remainder, and this should be equal to the dividend, the thing that you were dividing into in the first place. We'll do a couple of examples where we actually check our answers. To write your actual result for the answer, you'll write it as, this will be how the problem is set up, the dividend divided by the divisor, so this would be what would be starting off with. Your answer would be written as equal to the quotient plus the remainder divided by the divisor. And we've got an example here on this page that you'll use as your guide. So the first thing I do is I'm going to do a long division of normal numbers with you so that you can see that the process is very much the same. So what I'd like you to do is you are going to start off this problem with me. We're going to take 8,437, we're going to divide it by 6. So ignore these numbers temporarily. This is just like you would have learned in your elementary days when you did long division of numbers. So you start with the number 6 and you go to the first number 8. You ask yourself, how many times does 6 go into 8? Well, that's 1 time, and then you would take these two guys and you would multiply them. 1 times 6 is 6. You would write that down below the 8, and then you would subtract the 2. 8 minus 6 is 2, and then you would bring down your 4. At this point, you would start the process all over again. You ask yourself, how many times is 6 going to 24? That answer is 4 times. 4, you would multiply by 6 to get 24, and then that becomes 0. You bring down the next number, in this case that's 3. You do this process all over again. It's the same thing over and over. How many times does 6 go into 3? It doesn't, so you put the number 0 at the top. 0 times 6 will be 3. And then you subtract them and you get 3. Finally, bring down the last number, 7, and then start all over. 6 goes into 37 how many times? You put the number 6 above the number 7, and then you multiply. 6 by 6 is going to be 36, and 37 minus 36 is 1. This guy is called your remainder. And so what we have now is that 8,437, which is your dividend, is equal to your quotient, 1,406, times the divisor, plus 1/6. You could multiply 1,406 times 6. You'll get 8,436. And then you will add, this should say plus 1, not 1/6. I'm so sorry. This would be plus 1. And so then you would have 8,436 plus 1, which is 8,437. You can use your calculator to check that if you don't believe me. Okay, so now let's take that method that we just did with numbers, and let's use that same process here with polynomials now. So let's start with this first one. This first one would be the actual thing that we would have at the very beginning. This is asking us to divide x cubed minus 2x squared minus 3x plus 10. And we want to divide that by x plus 2. And so when we go to divide that, you start similarly. It's a little bit different in that you have an x plus 2, but you start with the first part of the binomial x, and you start with the first part of the polynomial x cubed. And so you ask yourself, what do you multiply x by to get x cubed? That answer is x squared. So now we put x squared above the x cubed, and we do like we did with long division of numbers. We multiply x squared by this divisor and multiply that by x plus 2. So I have that written here. It's kind of hard to see, but this says x squared, parenthesis, x plus 2. When you multiply those, you get x cubed plus 2x squared. And then we would end up subtracting this. X cubed minus x cubed is 0. Negative 2x squared minus 2x squared is negative 4x squared. And then I would bring down my 3x. Start all over again. Still start with the x only. What do you multiply x by to get negative 4x squared? Well, the answer to that is negative 4x. Then you actually go and take them and multiply them. This is going to say negative 4x parenthesis x plus 2. So the negative 4x was what came up here at the top, part of my quotient. I'm going to multiply that by my divisor now to get my next line. That becomes negative 4x times x, which is negative 4x squared. Negative 4x times 2, which is negative 8x. I'm going to subtract now. Negative 4x squared minus negative 4x squared is 0. Negative 3x minus negative 8. These two negatives will cancel and become plus 8. So we have negative 3x plus 8, which is positive 5x. You'll bring down the last number, in this case is 10, and you start all over. What do you multiply x by to get 5x? Well, the answer to that is 5. Then you multiply the last part of the quotient by the divisor again, and that'll give us my next line. So 5 times x plus 2 is 5x plus 10. You'll subtract, and when you do that, you end up with a remainder of 0. Later, when we talk about remainders, this goes in evenly, and we'll talk about later that this actually turns out to be an x-intercept, and that's why this says that there's a 0 here at x equals negative 2. So whenever you divide a polynomial by a factor, if you get a 0 as a remainder, then it goes in there evenly, and so that means whatever makes this factor 0 would actually become a root or a x-intercept. And that's what it's talking about in this case. So if you were to graph this on Desmos, f of x, you would actually have an x-intercept at negative 2. And so now we have that f of x is equal to x plus 2 times x squared minus 4x plus 5. So this is going to be the quotient. And when I multiply that by the divisor, x plus 2, if you were to FOIL all this out, you would get back your f of x. And then you would have plus 0 because the remainder was 0. And that's it for this page.